Hey guys, my name is Chriselle Mariflor, and I'm just going to jump right to it. So, I am from Maryland, and the cases that I found under my state's public disciplinary actions, a lot of them were, a handful of the cases were due to sexual misconduct in dual relationships, and they were all in violation of the Maryland Professional Counselors and Therapists Act. And so, out of all the cases that I looked at, um, all were due to sexual misconduct and dual relationships. And one particular case that I found interesting was an instance in which, again, it still showed and proved examples of inappropriate and unprofessional and unethical exchanges between the counselor and the client. And one of the things that was mentioned in those complaints were that the counselor had given the client gift certificates, CDs, text messages, emails, and a handwritten note. So this obviously shows that their relationship was a dual relationship, and probably even more so, uh, sexual misconduct in some way. And that's, I mean, it could be, and it was also seen through these text messages and these emails that were sent from counselor to client. And so obviously, it's unethical, and that it's in violation of the board. And one thing that I found interesting also in that case was that the client had traumatic brain injury, and so they were already vulnerable, and because of this unethical conduct and dual relationship with the client, it greatly affected the overall wellness of the client, in which they felt guilty because of the because it had affected the client's family overall and relationship with the spouse, and adding stress and all the things. So obviously, it wasn't for the betterment of the client. It was just inappropriate. And so, with these cases that I've found, a lot of them had a lot of them were that the board had revoked or suspended the counselor's license because of these inappropriate circumstances, and that they had revoked them for a period of time, and that the board also ordered that the counselor would complete a certain amount of hours of continuing education in a board approved course in professional ethics. The board also ordered that they obtained a supervisor, in which the counselor would meet frequently and have sessions with, and the board approved supervisor would have to submit quarterly reports of detailed progress to the board. And other things that were listed were that the board ordered were that the counselor would be on a probationary period, in which they must comply with such terms and conditions that they listed. And if they were to fail these conditions, then they are in violation of probation and the consent order that they have signed. And so, all in all, the counselor would have to comply with Maryland Professional Counselors and Therapists Act and all laws, statutes, and regulations pertaining to the practice of professional counseling. And so, these are some disciplinary actions that counselors must adhere to if behaved unethically or unprofessionally, or if their license is revoked. Another thing I want to talk about is counselor impairment. And in the ACA, it talks about impairment and that counselors have to monitor themselves for signs of impairment for their own physical, mental or emotional health. And if they were to become impaired, they need to refrain from offering such services for the best welfare of the client, because it affects the client overall if the counselor is impaired. And so, some steps in seeking for or having self care for the counselor is that, well, first of all, I think it's really necessary that the counselor should recognize the signs of impairment. I think that's ultimately the first step, is recognizing these signs in order to prevent it. But if the counselor is impaired, then the book, in our textbook reading of chapter 7, says that some steps would be to seek counseling for themselves, seek for supervision, take a break, or take a vacation from the practice, join a peer support group, get regular exercise, meditate, and take time to enjoy hobbies and seek support from family and friends. And so, one thing that I found really like a take home quote that I found in the book was that it said, "Attending to self care is an ethical obligation that must be taken seriously. Counselors cannot provide nourishment to clients if they do not nourish themselves." So I think that really explains it in and of itself, that self-care is really important, because in order to provide the best treatment for clients, counselors should take self-care seriously in order to be an effective counselor. So with the questions that I found, that I kind of that came to mind, were that dual relationships are unfortunately prevalent among counselor relationships, and I was wondering if there could be a better way to monitor the counselor relationship to ensure that there be no misconduct of any sort, and if so, should there be a stricter format of a background check? So